What's up, amigos? Just wanted to give you an update on the Cinco de Mayo event that I'm going to be having here at my home. We have some guest speakers already lined up. Let me tell you first, though, that what we're going to be doing is on May 6th, which is the Friday, and then May 7th, which is the Saturday. On the Friday, we're going to be having a tour of the city. I will take all of you and the guest speakers to a tour of San Antonio that wouldn't be your conventional type of tour. This is not a let's go check out the Alamo type of tour. This will be a tour of San Antonio or San Anto or Countdown City 210, more my style. And we'll definitely hang out afterwards, have some drinks, some food, try to make it a unique experience that you won't ever forget. And of course, then the Saturday, that will be the main event. So we will have a special late lunch that my cousin Gabriel is preparing. He is making a cabrito that feeds about, I think I talked to him yesterday. He says it feeds between 20 and 30 people. So be sure to get your tickets early by emailing me at loslibertinos210@gmail.com. But that will be on Saturday. And of course, then we will have our guest speakers having some conversations with all of us. I will have some special topics for them. And we will do that on Saturday after the lunch. And so far, I have a pretty cool lineup. It's a Texas style event. And right now we have Buck Johnson from the Counterflow podcast lined up. We also have Andrew from Popular Liberty coming in from Houston to the event. And then we have a new fellow Texan that is going to make the event also, and that is Matt Erickson from the King Pilled podcast. So I plan to add a couple of more guests, and I plan to also, and I forgot, then after all of that, and of course it's going to be recorded, I want audience participation. I want it to be a very freestyle flow of ideas, back and forward. And as you might recall, I am building a stadium in my backyard. It is going to be made for playing football and having fun with family and friends, but it's also made to host this type of event. And then, of course, at the end, we will be all hanging out with my family and friends and all of you guys, and we'll be watching the main event fight, the Canelo versus the Russian vato, I forgot his name, Bivol, I think is his name, that night. And we'll just have a chingazos and fire type of evening. It should be all positive. You should leave this event feeling better about your current state of affairs and coming off of this event with a better mindset about everything. I mean, it's meant to be a positive event. So, and family friendly. So be sure to email me at loslibertinos210@gmail.com for more information. And like I said, it's a limited seating. So please be sure to get with me early before tickets run out. Peace. Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelar, and this is Chingazos and Fire, episode number 35. Our guest today is Steve Paxton, coming live from the UK. He is the author of the book Unlearning Marx, Why the Soviet Failure Was a Triumph to Marx. He had an academic career culminating in doctoral research with G.A. Cohen at Oxford. He is also a contributor to the Communist Manifesto, New Interpretations, and is currently working on a new book that will come out soon, hopefully, called How Capitalism Ends. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So could you please give us a background into your story, where you were born, raised, and kind of your path of education and how you kind of got into this line of work, and talk about how if there's any type of like stories or events in your life that led you to being able to research and write about Karl Marx, or stuff like that. So yeah, the floor is yours to let my audience know something about you. Yeah.
Okay, so I was born in England in the 60s, since 1966. I didn't really expect when I was growing up to be going to university. I didn't really know anyone who'd been, well, I didn't know anyone who'd been to university when I was growing up. I'm not sure I even really knew what a university was. So I was kind of fairly surprised myself when I ended up there. So I had, after leaving school, I did various jobs. I worked building dry stone walls. I worked in a betting shop for a couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years. And at some point, I'd done A-levels, so I'd left school at 16, and then I went back a few years later and did A-levels, which is in the UK is kind of a step between school and university. So I did that part-time while I was working, and then went back to work again. And then after a while, I decided that, I needed to go to uni. So, so I did that. And by this point, I'd got my oldest son. He was born, and my daughter was born while I was at uni. So we didn't have any money. we were just really poor all the time I was studying. But it kind of, it was okay for a while. Finished my degree, and I started a doctorate. And I started doing some lecturing as well, which helped pay a few bills. But I was still doing a load of work, kind of manual work and that kind of thing to bring some money in. And it just became, after a while, it just became kind of impossible to juggle doing a doctorate and working at the weekends and bringing up a family and never having any money. So I kind of, at the time, what I thought I was suspending my doctorate for a while. So I went and got what I did was I taught myself some programming and got a job doing database programming online. The internet was kind of, this was about 98, so the internet was quite a new thing then. It was kind of, I can remember telling people what when people kind of say, what you're working at now, and I'd say I'm making websites. Most people would just say, well, what's that then? You'd say, well, the internet? No, don't know what that is. That's, this is less than 25 years ago. People didn't know, most people just didn't know what the internet was. Some people were online, but most people had never really encountered this thing that is now fills all our lives all the time. So I kind of always intended to kind of finish off my doctorate part-time or to go back full-time once I'd kind of alleviated the money pressures a bit, but it never really happened. So I carried on working in various forms for another kind of 15, 20 years. And then when I got to a point where I was actually, making enough money that I could stop working so much and have a bit of time, then a publisher asked me to write something about Marx. So I kind of got my, this was my opportunity really to get my, to finish my doctorate. So this book, Unlearning Marx, is really my thesis from my doctorate, but slightly updated and also written for a more general audience. It's not really written, a doctoral thesis is usually pretty dry and pretty heavy going, and it's written for people that are already very well versed in the field. So I've tried to write this in a more general voice, really to kind of get a message out. I think it's important. I think quite often when you're, as you said earlier, you're surprised by the title of it, that the Soviet Union, the failure of the Soviet Union was actually proved Marx right. And I think we so often hear there's no shortage of talking heads who are willing to say, as soon as you mention any kind of thing about socialism or anything like that, then they just say, well, that's already failed. That's, Marx, you mentioned Marx, well, his ideas didn't work. And so they kind of sweep just in one sentence, they've just swept the whole thing away. But actually Marx's ideas, Marx's theory would have been quite severely damaged. His theory of history would have been quite severely damaged if the Soviet Union had actually succeeded. And in the 19th century, I mean, this was an issue at the time as well with Russia. In the 19th century, Russian revolutions were writing to Karl Marx in the 1880s saying, hang on a minute, according to your theory, then if we have a revolution, it's not going to work. And he wrote back saying, well, kind of, yeah, sorry about that, guys. It's not. And then he obviously struggled with that letter in his kind of collected works. There's kind of 4 drafts of that letter that ended up in the bin, and he's trying to explain and kind of dance around it a bit. But in the end, he just writes quite a short note, just saying, yeah, you're right. If I'm right, if you have a revolution, it's just not going to work. But then the next year in 1882, he wrote, there was a new Russian edition of the Communist Manifesto came out, and Marx wrote a new preface for it. And in that, he kind of gave Russia a bit of a get out clause. He said in there, because the reason why he had argued that a revolution couldn't work in Russia is because it was too backwards. A socialist revolution would have to come in the most advanced capitalist countries. And if it happened in Russia, which is so backward, it wouldn't succeed. But he gave them a bit of a get out clause in this 1882 preface where he said, if the Russian Revolution sparks revolutions elsewhere, Germany was the most likely candidate, possibly England, maybe even America, but Germany was really where people expected it to be. If the Russian Revolution happens and acts as a catalyst and sparks revolutions in more advanced countries, then there's a possibility that it could succeed. But without that, then it would kind of be doomed to failure. And Lenin and Trotsky were aware of this, in 1917 as they kind of launched the Bolshevik Revolution. And
well, Steve, I'm gonna have to interrupt you a little bit because I am not aware. Like I told you before, like I'm gonna come at you as a clean slate here because yeah, man, like I've never read any of this stuff. So like when I was telling you off air was before we started recording was that I went on to that RU class because I had as I've gotten older, I've gotten away from trying to just give out the talking points, just like you said. Right. I would have said, oh, that's Marxist, or oh, that's socialist, or all just to basically I understood it as like a collectivist idea, and I would have been for like the individual or so those kind of talking points. So and in this podcast too, I'm trying to reach out to people to learn more as I kind of go through this journey of trying to expand my mind and expand for the audience too. But in that class, the RU class, just so I kind of get a good foundation as we kind of go through this conversation here. What was your take of the class? So I was there for 1.5 classes. It's 4 classes. I was there for like a 1.5, and then the rest of them I had to kind of like watch on my own and kind of skip through it some. What was your take on that? Because that's going to help me then know if you and I were kind of watching the same thing. I know that they came at it, and this is Thad Russell and Ben Burgess, who I've interviewed both of them, but they were coming at it from different angles. What was your take on that class, on the like to kind of sum it up, so I kind of know where we both stand a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think
if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So I enjoyed the class. I mean, I do this kind of thing because I don't work in academia at the moment, and I haven't done for years. So I don't have people that, normally when you're writing books on politics, you're working in a politics department and you're bouncing stuff off people and sending people chapters and things. And I don't really have that feedback mechanism as much as I would do if I was there. So it's good to just get online with a load of people and talk about a lot of these issues. And and it was good for that. I enjoyed it. I think it's a good idea to not have an echo chamber. It's a good idea to have that kind of some people that are kind of normally in Ben's classes and some that are normally in Thaddeus classes. So there was, there's a good mix of people in there. I think they maybe were a bit over ambitious in how much they were expecting to cover in each lecture because we didn't really, I think by the end of the 4, we were kind of like halfway through where we should have been, like halfway through the second one or something. But that's because there was so much discussion about it and so much, people were interested enough to have conversations. So I think it's the first time they've done one in that kind of style. So maybe they'll have a kind of a less ambitious timetable next time. But no, I enjoyed the class and I thought it was good. And I thought it's always good. It's a really good thing to have your ideas challenged by people who aren't the people that normally challenge them. And then you can, there's only a certain amount that you can put yourself outside your own head and challenge your own ideas. It's always good. And if you're hanging around with a load of people that are mainly of the same political persuasion as you, then you're going to get certain criticisms, but there's a whole set of criticisms that you won't get unless you talk to people that are kind of diametrically opposed to your position. In some ways I get, because I do various different bits of work, I still do a load of programming. I work on, in the summer, I work on installations at cricket grounds. So there's a different set of people there. And I don't have this kind of academic echo chamber. I'm not surrounded by people that think the same as me. So I think I do get, I get challenged in that way with people with very different ideas to mine. But then also, by the same token, they're not usually people that have studied politics to any length, so that we're maybe coming at it from a slightly different angle in that way.
Perfect. Fair enough. And and that way you understand where like my narrative of the Soviet Union or like how it ended up failing was, I remember as a kid, really one of the, I guess it would have been a propaganda movie at the time, but yeah, like I remember watching Rocky IV and, Drago taking steroids. And that must have been the only way that the Soviet Union guy could have beaten the US guy and all that.
Yeah.
And I remember that as a kid and just being like, oh, okay, well, that's the, they have to cheat to beat us. And then over the years, I would have heard, people were starving and millions of people died. And then that, that capitalism outspent the Russians because it was a superior system in that way. And then really it was just like anywhere where communism or socialism is implemented, basically people starve and die. And Cuba, our neighbor, just look at them. They still have 1950s cars and stuff like that. So it's just the normal stuff. And like I said, but to me, it was enough that I never really questioned it because I was like, okay, there's like videos and stuff and pictures. And I was satisfied with that narrative. And like I said, when I heard you speaking up in the class, I reached out to you pretty fast, but I was like, hey, man, I want to talk to you. You got something that's going to kind of flip me, kind of flip what I've always understood. So before we get into the like your narrative of your book and the receipts that you come in which you talk about, can you kind of give a brief kind of history of the man Marx, just for anybody that doesn't know, because a lot of people that might listen to my show are going to be like cousins and tios and tias that really don't know a lot of that. So can we get a little bit into Marx and then we can get into why his ideas resonated, and then we could do it in the context of the Soviet experience.
Sure. So he was born in Germany in, I can't remember the exact year, but early 19th century. And he was a kind of a lower middle class family. His dad was Jewish but had converted to Christianity, I think. I'm not the person to give you the full-blown bio on Marx.
Sure.
It's his ideas that I'm really interested rather than his kind of lifetime. But he went to university, studied philosophy at university. He wrote a lot about Hegel. He was who was a very influential German idealist philosopher at the time. A lot of people say that Marx stood Hegel on his head. Some people argue that Marx kind of took Hegel's methodology, not his methodology really, but the form of his arguments and gave it new content. There is quite a debate among Marxist scholars about how much Hegel influenced Marx. It's not I mean, I did a podcast a while ago about that very subject actually, but it's not that I don't care, to be honest, how much. I mean, I think we've got to be careful not to think Hegel's influence is so great that we start misreading Marx. But I don't, you know, it sounds a bit flippant to say I don't care. That's not my thing that I'm interested in. It's fine if other people are interested in that, that's their thing. But I'm kind of interested in what Marx had to say rather than how he came to think that way. So he started as a philosopher. He worked as an editor was a journalist and then an editor of various German newspapers. He worked for some American newspapers in the 1860s. He was a member of the Communist League in the 1840s, and I think it was they commissioned him, Marx and Engels, to write the Communist Manifesto. So there were a series of revolutions going on in Russia in 1848, and they kind of needed to get something out quick, get their manifesto out to sort of position themselves in all this turmoil. And it's certainly his that and Capital are Marx's most famous works. But I think the Communist Manifesto, that, you know, there's some good stuff in it, but also it was a bit of a rush job. I think it was written mostly by Engels and then largely rewritten by Marx. But it was kind of done to order in a bit of a rush, and it's a bit of a kind of a political pamphlet. It's a call to arms, really. And it's quite, in places, the emphasis is quite different to his more sort of, partly his later work, but also his more kind of theoretical, more considered work and his work on the theory of history. So there are some tensions between the things he said in the manifesto and the things he said in more theoretical works. And I tend to find the more theoretical stuff more plausible, really, and more valuable than the stuff in the manifesto. And then as he got older, he was exiled from Germany, had to go and live in London, and was partly supported by Engels. And he traipsed down to the British Library in London most days and churned out Capital. He wrote he just wrote an insane amount of stuff. The Marx Engels collected works, if you ever find it in a library, it's about 60 volumes. There's maybe 5 million words there or something. So, and it's all, and also he did things like when Russian revolutionaries started writing to him and asking him, you know, what about their situation in terms of his theory, he went and learnt Russian so that he could go and read loads of Russian history in its original language and then give them a better reply. So he was a busy guy. And I think one of the things that I've tried to bring out is that most people who come to Marx tend to come through the prism of Lenin and Trotsky, because they've because of the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union. That's kind of the big thing. And so they come to Marx through that prism of Lenin and Trotsky. And one thing it means that we see it kind of through their eyes, and they were caught up in these huge world-changing events. So what I've tried to do is step back from that and kind of ignore what Lenin and Trotsky had to say and concentrate actually on what Marx said, not how they interpreted it. And one of the reasons for that is that they really focus on his kind of political stuff. So Marx did write a lot of political stuff, especially in his journalism. But he also, Capital is mainly an economics book, but there's loads of history in there as well. So he was he was an economist, a historian, a philosopher, a journalist, and a political agitator. And he wrote over decades. So obviously in there's going to be some contradictions. People change their mind. People, different contexts bring different ideas to the fore. People, different events that happen in people's lives change their view on things. So there's a load of stuff there, and it's not, I don't think anyone would claim that Marx is 100% kind of internally consistent. There's a lot of different strands you can drag out from Marx, and a lot of different things you can look at what Marx said, and you can come out with a load of different conclusions, and that's okay. That's fine. And I think one of the reasons why I don't tend to refer to myself as a Marxist is that I think as soon as you do that, then it pushes you towards defending everything he said or everything he did. And I'm not really interested in that. I'm happy to accept that he had some flaws, that some of the stuff he wrote was rubbish. But I think there's still some stuff in there that's really good and really useful for us. And we shouldn't look at the stuff isn't so good and then dismiss everything, we can still get some value out of the stuff that he wrote, that particularly his theory of history for me.
So let's talk about
understand the world we're in.
Yeah, so let's talk about the history part. So is that what his historical materialist view? Is that what it is? Okay, so yeah, I had to look that up because you had brought it up in the class, like lightly, you know, because obviously it wasn't your class. So every time you would kind of bring up some stuff, you know, I was like, oh, okay. And man, I had never even knew about these series of stages and different, like, and how, you know, I consider myself an entrepreneur, you know, have, you know, family business. I own rental properties. I just bought some new property that I plan to develop and build little houses and then rent them, you know, I mean, I don't know. Even when so like, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a good reader. I'm not that kind of guy, but I can see around and I could just see capital everywhere. What stuff costs, what is producing. If I see a building there, I'm like, oh, what are they paying for rent? What are they, man, you know, all of that just goes through my head like nothing, man. I like that those numbers and all that, just, I mean, that's easy for me. It just comes real easy to me. But I had never even thought about the idea that there was stages and all that. So can you kind of get into that? Because I really want to get into this. This is cool stuff, and it's fascinating.
Okay. So Marx, whereas a lot of historians, certainly at the time, but even now as well, a lot of historians will categorize societies from the past or even the present as according to their political organizations. So they'll talk about republics or monarchies, democracies, dictatorships, that kind of thing. And obviously that's an important way of looking at things, but it's not the only way of looking at things. And Marx tends to look at the economic structures of a society. So he talks more about feudalism, sort of slavery in the ancient world, in Rome and Greece. Lots of people have commented that Marx is kind of, possibly because of the access to sources that were available in his time, you know, Marx is kind of wrong about some of the stuff that he thought about those societies. But there was a lot around that he could learn about medieval feudalism. And when he has this idea that society progresses through. So at some point we have a feudal system, but now we have capitalism in his time. How did this happen? How did we get from feudalism to capitalism? That's what he's trying to understand. And what he argues is that basically the growth of productive power, the growth of productive capacity, means that we're not on a straight line. It's not always going up. It's not always going at the same speed. Sometimes it might go backwards, but there is a tendency that technology develops. Our productive capacity over time does increase. And as it increases, then different types of society suit increasing it more at any particular level. So there's a level of development that feudalism is really good for moving us up towards the amount of productivity we need before capitalism can happen. Capitalism is really good at moving us up through to the level that we need before socialism can happen. So he's seeing this as there are material preconditions for each of these stages. You can't have capitalism until you can have things like a fluid labor force. And you can't have capitalism thrives off industrialization and urbanization. So if you look at something like, say, England in 1500, 75% of the population worked on the land. And that means that each person is producing enough food for themselves and a third of another person. And that's just simply you're not producing enough food to have big towns or any kind of industrialization. You can't have a huge industrial workforce because you're not producing, you need everybody working on the land just to make enough food for them and the few, you know, this very small non-agricultural population. So, but over time, agriculture, invention, you know, technological developments, people learn about crop rotation, they learn about sheepfolding, they learn about adding nutrients to the soil, and they learn, and they start to make progress in producing sufficient surplus that you can have more people not working on the land, and that frees those people up to go and work in industry. And this Marx has a particular, you know, there's a fairly kind of a detailed way that he describes that process happening, but the gist of it is that the technological development, it moves you up through it increases during the feudal era, but then you get to a point where the feudal social arrangements, the relations of production, who owns what, those relations just prevent people from any further technological development. There's too much custom, and there's tradition, and there's the old ways of doing things, and they just kind of stifle further development. The feudal system was stifling the kind of emergence of the factory system. And some people, some of the feudal landowners, start seeing these opportunities to make some money. So maybe if they kick their peasants off the land and put sheep there instead, and the price of wool has gone up, then they can make more money. So some of the sort of more forward-looking guys start doing that kind of thing, but others are still attached more to the kind of the traditional ways. And there are lots of reasons why some people might act in one way and some people might act in another. So some is just down to people's personalities. Some people are more risk averse than others. Some people are more adventurous than others. But there's also things like, does your land actually, is the land that you own suited to more modern farming methods, or would it be a waste of time kind of modernizing that? One of the big things was how close people were, their proximity in the feudal hierarchy to the crown. Because if they were very close to the crown, those guys don't want anything to change. They're doing really well out of the current system. They're not advocating for any changes. They're probably not necessarily viewing a small increase in agricultural production as a threat to their position. But actually, that's what it turns into, because those small increases mount up, and the small changes that people make where they start evicting tenants and enclosing the land, that kind of gradually increases. And over a couple of 100 years, you get this situation where the more progressive landlords are joined by these kind of a new kind of merchant class who are really kind of out for making a load of money as well. And they've been stifled by the feudal system. There were all kinds of restrictions on what you could buy and what you could sell and who you could sell it to and where you could have a market. And these guys kind of circumvented that by holding illegal markets outside of the borough towns. So you get these two things. You get these forward-looking landowners and you get this new merchant class developing, and they start getting quite a bit of power. They're getting power, but it's economic power. They've just got the money, they've got the clout, but they don't have any political power. And that then they start butting up against the established order. And then you get in the 1640s, you get a civil war in England, and it's really between, we always call it, we're at school in England, we're always taught it's the English Civil War, but in the 1930s, a Marxist historian called Christopher Hill said, hang on, that's England's revolution. That's the English Revolution you're looking at there. That's the capitalist revolution, whereby the rising bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, overthrow the feudal barons and the old order. And it kind of, it's not a kind of a complete break. They win the Civil War, they cut the king's head off, Oliver Cromwell takes over for a bit, tries to put his son in charge, which is really not what people were kind of expecting to happen, because this looks like starting a new dynasty. And in the end, they restored the monarchy, and then which was 1660, and then by 1688, they felt that the monarchy was going in the wrong direction and trying to revert to its old ways under James, and so they kind of invited William of Orange to come in, who's a staunchly Protestant, came in from Holland, took over the English throne, but in a very much reduced role, a very constitutional. So we ended up then with a constitutional monarchy. So the capitalist class, who are represented by Parliament, had now got kind of a foothold in political power. Instead of the king, as Charles I in 1628, just say, right, I'm not having a parliament anymore, go away. And he ruled without a parliament for 11 years. By the end of the 17th century, then you have a constitutional monarchy, and Parliament has a lot more power, and that suits the rising capitalist class a lot more, because that's their power base, really. That their economic power, they've now got some political power to go with it. So in some ways, there's a lot of things to a couple of things you can take from that. One is that actual process of revolution kind of took a few hundred years. There was the flashpoint at the end that we call the Civil War, or that Christopher Hill called the English Revolution. But that was really, most of it was done by then. Most of it had already happened. The revolution was this long process where a different kind of arrangement, a different type of ownership, a different set of things that can be owned, a different way of looking at property rights, all that kind of thing came in over this long period. And then the flashpoint was when the class that was sort of had benefited from all this, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, managed to just grab the political power, and that completed the revolution.
You said that it was done over hundreds of years, and it sounds like technology was the pace setter. Where was the law? What was the? How was the law? What was the the law? Always seems to me like it's a reflection of like the community. And did the I don't even know, man. Like, did the Magna Carta and all that stuff was that a pace setter within that? Of giving more rights to people in that way, where the king, relinquished some of his sovereignty to the people a little bit? Was that a pace setter within that, or that didn't really play too much into it? Because I'm just asking because I do like the idea of pace setters, because even now in my life where I don't try to pay attention to too much stuff, I do like to pay attention to the people that I think set pace, and that's just mostly to be efficient about how I spend my mental bandwidth on whatever I want to get into. So was the law, where was the law in that? So I only interrupted you because you had said property rights, or
Sure.
So that to me is part of the law. Of how do they protect property rights? Where was the law in this transition over time?
Firstly, for the Magna Carta, so that was 1215, I think, and that had no. That doesn't mention ordinary people. That's kind of between the king and the barons.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. It is a bit of it's the king acknowledging that he doesn't get to do exactly what he wants, and he needs to take account of what the barons want as well. But it's certainly not kind of ordinary. It doesn't have any effect on your average peasant wandering around the streets.
But it's like once a king says, "I'm not all there," I'm not the super sovereign, then anybody can always look up and be like, "Hey, I'll take a shot." So then it starts kind of that takes hundreds of but anyway, that's why I brought it up.
That did happen, and there were civil wars in England, after.
Okay.
I mean, there had been before, but there were after as well. The Wars of the Roses. They're kind of battles over who's going to succeed, because quite often it's not that clear. There are various pretenders to the throne, and then there's a war to basically decide. In their view, in theory, is the war will show them which one God has chosen, because they believe that they claim to believe that they're ruling through the divine right of kings, and that's, I mean, as a named doctrine, that's a bit later than the Wars of the Roses, I think, but that's certainly that's their attitude is that they're king because God says they should be king, and if God thought they shouldn't be king, then somebody else would be king. So there's that, and you have that's part of the thing with feudalism, is that you have these beliefs like the divine right of kings and the great chain of being, all justifying this horrendously unequal system that is there. It's all justified through these kind of religious doctrines, whereas the capitalist revolution, what they bring with they kind of, although they're the material changes of what brings that about, they then have to bring into place. So they have people like John Locke justifying private property, that kind of thing. So the capitalism brings with it a new ideology and a new set of ideas that legitimize the capitalist system. And the law, I think, I think with Marx, he kind of sometimes talks about things where when he says somebody owns something, what he means is that they have a right to use it. It doesn't necessarily own it. Other times he's more, he's obviously very aware of the fact in pre-capitalist Europe, the law wasn't like it is now, so it was more arbitrary. You were much more likely to be at the whim. I mean, we're already, that if the judge got out of bed on the wrong side on a particular day, then you might get a harsher sentence. But then it was much more arbitrary, and that was a thing that held capitalism back, because capitalism needs investment, and to invest in things, you need to know what your return's going to be, and you need to know that after you've spent all the money, someone's not going to come along and say, well, actually, you can't do that. I've just decided you're not allowed to do that, and I'm having that now, or whatever. Or start charging people to use this thing that you've built. You need certainty that your investment is going to be returned. And so capitalism needs a really codified set of laws. So that's one of the things that the capitalist revolutions brought with them, was a much more focused legal system and a much less based on statute law and case law, rather than on the arbitrary decisions of kind of local magistrates and things. Obviously that was a process that took time to come in. For a long time under capitalism, ordinary people still had to put up with the local magistrate and whether he's having a good day or not. But kind of bigger projects and people higher up in society benefited from this kind of certainty of law and investment, which made it kind of smoothed the path for capitalist development, and all kinds of things like railways and canals and building factories all benefited from that kind of legal, codifying of the legal system, and much more predictability of that.
Don't forget to visit our sponsor, palomaverdecbd.com. It is a family-run business that my wife and I run out of our home. We've had it for a little over 2 years, and the last year we have been strictly an online business. We've had our struggles, but we've persevered, and we have also recently added some new products to our line. Of course, you know that we have all the edibles, the tinctures, all the salves, and creams, sports creams, and some of the pet products. But we've added this time some, bath bombs, 25 milligrams each. There's 4 in this bottle. Be sure to take care of your lady, or you could take care of yourself if you're that kind of vato. That's cool too. And also some massage oil, once again, to take care of your lady or yourself if you're that kind of vato. That's okay too. And when we first started the business, if any of you guys are aware, it was meant to help our fathers out. And at that time, the stigma behind cannabis products was still around here in our culture. Our fathers weren't really up to it, but we kind of told them that there was no psychoactive effects or any THC in the product, and then they have been users of it, and they've gotten a lot of benefits from it. But we've also listened to our customers, and many of them have mentioned that they'd like us to bring in a full spectrum product, because there are some extra benefits sometimes through the entourage effect if you have some of the THC in it. So we have a new full spectrum tincture, 2250 milligram tincture bottle. So you can be sure to check that out if you're trying to get some of that, plus all the other products that we have. So visit palomaverdecbd.com. Use the promo code Chingazos at checkout, CHINGASOS, for 20% off anything that you purchase, free shipping. So be sure to check it out. And I appreciate, Vanessa and I appreciate any of your support. Get your products, take care of your body and mind, and peace. So the stage after capitalism, and why the Soviet failure happened was because they got ahead of the game some, right? Basically.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, they tried to. Yeah. So Marx argues that in the same way that there's an amount of technologies, a level of technological development that you need before you can get into capitalism. There's also a level of technological development that you need before you can have socialism. So Marx argues that capitalism is, a lot of people don't realize that, a lot of people think Marx has a huge downer on capitalism and can't see anything good about it, and it's all terrible and everything else. but he does see some positives there. So firstly, it's an improvement on feudalism in terms of people's personal freedom and a million other things, but also its real benefit is the really big thing about capitalism for Marx is its ability to develop productive capacity much more rapidly and to a far greater extent than any other system. So you need capitalism to create the abundance that is required before you can have socialism. If historically we live in scarcity, there isn't enough stuff to go around, and so people are fighting over it. What Marx says is, if you try to socialize, if you try to have socialism while there is still scarcity, what are you doing? All you're doing is sharing out not enough. So then everybody's got not enough, and that just pisses everybody off. Nobody's happy, and they're gonna rail against that regime, and they're going to bring the regime down because you've just pissed everybody off and made everybody poor. So what he argues is that you need capitalism to produce this huge amount of abundance and this to drive technological development on, so that we can produce so much stuff that we've got enough stuff that we can then start sharing it out, and that then you can have socialism. When I say sharing it out, I mean kind of distributing more reasonably.
How does that work? So this is where I would be like, so that meaning that you want enough I don't know, like residual or fertile ground of productive capacity, where then the state, or like through the democratic process, someone says like there's extra whatever and we can share. I mean, like it seems like we just like so the way that you were able to explain the transition from feudalism to capitalism, how does the next transition work? Because I'm definitely going to be paying attention to that there. So how does that work?
Okay. Well, I think the lessons are really, so a lot of people, like the Bolsheviks in 1917 in Russia, thought it worked by seizing the means of production through a violent kind of overthrow of the previous regime. It's kind of a moot point whether or not that was part of the reason why the Soviet Union failed, is because it came about by a sudden revolution. But really, Marx's idea as to why it failed is that they were too soon. I think he said they got ahead of themselves. There wasn't enough productive capacity, and so it was Marx calls that kind of a revolution a premature revolution, and he argues that it'll just fail because unless it can spark revolutions in the more advanced countries, which obviously it didn't. So in terms of the next revolution, I think the lesson is that it probably won't happen suddenly. It will probably it is probably already going on, actually, in the way that from kind of 1500 people started experimenting with more, putting their operations on a more capitalist footing, started trying to do new things, new ways of looking at things. People are doing that already. So in England we had or in the UK we had the NHS from 1945. Totally free healthcare for cradle to the grave for everybody. That's now being rolled back because we didn't put in place the right defences. But it was a hugely popular thing while it was there, and it still is hugely popular. So much so that the people that are getting rid of it have to lie about the fact they're getting rid of it, because they get lynched if people realise what they're doing. You've got other things, there are small things like in Germany and Sweden, every company above a certain size has to have workers sitting on the board of directors. You've got places experimenting with things like universal basic income, and you've got places experimenting with 4-day week. You've got, most modern Western countries have got a reasonable welfare system with some sort of arrangement for unemployment and that kind of thing. So there are things pushing in those directions. We have state education. Education isn't completely privatized. So there are kind of experiments, and what we'll see really as we go on, which experiments. I don't think the UK or the US are probably going to be the place where the decisive changes happen. I think we're too we were kind of at the forefront of capitalism, And because
Yeah,
of
that's
that,
what I
we've
was going
got
to
this
ask. I was
kind
going
of-
to say, well, you know, if these were the most capitalistic place, then would they be the first in line to bring in the socialist trends? You know, but you're saying that it won't be there.
Well, I think they were they were kind of like at the forefront of capitalism, but for a long time. But I think they're kind of they've got this kind of slightly backward-looking mentality in the UK and the US. This, you know, certainly in the UK, there's this sort of former glory, the past, looking back at empire and everything like that. And you know, look at America with Trump, which make America great again. It's looking back. It's saying we were great. Let's be like that again. But that time's gone. And being great in the next 20 or 30 years is going to be about making your population happier and more content, and, you know, more sophisticated and healthier and all that kind of thing. And that doesn't come through more stuff. There's some really good research by Richard Wilkinson about where he looks at these standard kind of indicators of it. There is a kind of a happiness index somewhere, but I think he uses a different set. So there's all kind of criteria like prison population, divorce levels, life expectancy, teenage pregnancies, number of people who've gone to university, people who say they're happy with their job, all loads of kind, you know, social care arrangements, that kind of thing. Loads of things that you kind of are fairly easy to say, yeah, I'd want more of that, or I'd want less of that in my life. And what he finds is there's no correlation between how good a country fares on those scales and how rich it is. Among modern, you know, the sort of kind of liberal capitalist nations, Western Europe, America, Japan, South Korea, that kind of thing. But what he does find is there's a really striking correlation between the level of inequality and how well countries do on all those measures about how happy their population is and how well their population are. And the more equal countries with lower inequality indexes fare much better on all those measures of kind of social success. And the countries with more inequality, which includes the UK and the US, do less well on all those markers. So, and partly what that argument is part of it's contributing to this idea that we've got enough stuff now. You know, our lives are not going to be improved by having more stuff. We have different estimates, between 7 and 9 million people die of hunger every year, but we throw away 28% of the food we produce. So, you know, the problems we have are not problems that are going to be solved by having more food. That's not going to stop those people starving to death. We're throwing away food. The problem is we have an economic system that doesn't let us give that food to those people. And so we need to start having a different focus. We need a focus that is not on more. You know, and you can see, you know, I mean, is your life going to be improved by having more kind of, you know, another car, more bling, or is your life going to be improved by having, you know, more time to spend with your family and better healthcare and, you know, living in a safer neighborhood and all those things and lots of things. You know, there are plenty of people in capitalist countries that don't have enough, and so there does need to be some redistribution, but it doesn't need to come from producing more. There's already enough. There's, you know, how many yachts has Jeff Bezos got? There are people sending themselves into space in a kind of billionaire pissing contest. What we've got enough is the thing. So we need to work out ways that we can harness that productive capacity that capitalism has given us and try to use it in a more efficient and a more positive way.
Yeah. So then technology would be the driver in that, but man, I'm hearing you, but I guess the inner entrepreneur kind of business guy in me is saying like, well, I kind of do want some extra stuff. You know, like one of my main drivers in life, and my wife knows this because I told her from the beginning, was that I was like, you know what, I just want enough money to make enough money so I can go to the biggest boxing matches around the world and to the biggest football matches around the world, like to Europe. Like I was like, man, like, I want to get to a point where I can go to the Champions League final every year in Europe and we'll just do a family trip. Okay, well, that takes a lot of money. That takes a lot of little houses I got to build and a lot of stuff I got to do. And I don't know. I mean, would I I mean, I'm happy watching them on TV. I am. Can I just do it like that? That's what I'm doing now, and it's pretty happy. But I'd like to be there in person. But yeah, that's kind of a hard one, and maybe that's kind of like how you had described about the people in agriculture, the ones that were forward thinking or were thinking about making some extra money and all that, and it was more about the character of the person. So in this transition, a character like me that might want to do that, what role do they play? I mean, because man, I'm gonna be honest real quick, man. Like, I flirted with communism like in my early 20s. So I came into politics through the Bill Marshall. So I used to, we got HBO, we have enough money to have cable. We got HBO. I started watching this guy, and I was like, hey, this guy's making a lot of sense on a lot of stuff. And somehow I started reading a little communist stuff, and I told my dad, my dad's a guy from Mexico and just worked his whole life. And he goes, in Spanish, he goes, no, esos pa pinches huevones. So basically he's like, that's just for lazy people. That's just for lazy people. What about what you want to start? We already have lazy people in our own family. You want to take care of the lazy people in other people's family? And real quick, that was it. That's all I needed. I was like, no, I don't. And that was it. That was it was like a week where I was kind of looking into it, and that was it. That's all he had to tell me, just to be like, so there is some of that in it, but I'm not against like what you're saying in the way it sounds, but I don't know if how it in practice it comes about. But like you said, there's there's stages, and maybe it does come, maybe not in my lifetime, and maybe it comes in the future somehow, and it'll be nice if it could all happen that way. But I don't know, man. There's I don't know. So I don't know, what kind of role does someone like an ambitious entrepreneur kind of person have, where I mean, I'm not saying I'm greedy, I mean, we took care of all of our workers, and there's probably none of our workers here that would say, oh, these are bad bosses or none of that. We take care, they've been with us for 20 plus years since I was a kid. A lot of these guys are old guys that have been with us for a long time. And, I mean, what role does that kind of person have that, does, like someone like me that kind of, plays the game in that way?
Yeah. Well, I think you're kind of more like the feudal guy that was kind of clinging on to the feudal past. You're trying to cling on to the capitalist system that is on its way out. And to be fair, part of the reason why you're doing that is that you own some means of production. So one of the ways that Marx defines capitalism is it's an economic structure where most people are proletarians, and that means they own no means of production. But they do own their own labor power. And that differentiates them from feudal workers, because feudal workers did have some kind of ownership. Didn't mean the same thing then, but they had some kind of occupancy rights to the land where they lived. They had some kind of rights to use the common resources, so they could graze a sheep on the common, or they could collect firewood from the spinney or something like that. So they had some kind of control and some kind of ownership is probably too strong a word, but sometimes kind of possession of some means of production. But they didn't have full control or possession of their own labor power. They couldn't just go and work where they liked. They were, they had to apply to leave the village or to go and work somewhere else. They had to ask the lord of the manor for permission, sometimes even just to temporarily go and work outside of the manor. So that's one of the defining things about capitalism, is that we end up with people who don't own any means, that they're free because they are free to sell their labor power to anyone they like, but they're unfree because they have to sell their labor power to someone, otherwise they're going to starve to death. They can't just till their own land, and because they don't own anything, so they don't own any land, they don't own any means of production. So it's kind of in a way it's a double-edged sword. And this is, and then on the other hand, apart from the proletarians who don't own any means of production, you have the bourgeoisie who own all the means of production, and the proletarians have to go and sell their labor to a member of the bourgeoisie. So your position is, so you're saying that some of these workers have been with you since you were a kid. So I'm guessing this is your dad's business. So you've been fortunate in that you've grown up in a family that owns some means of production. And It might not be enough that you don't have to go to work, but it's certainly enough that other people are going to work are increasing your pot of cash. Your ability to go to the Champions League final depends on a load of people going and doing some work. They don't have a choice to say, well, actually, I'm going to employ a load of people and I'm going to go to the Champions League final. Their only option is to go and work for someone else. And so they're never going to be in that. You're never going to earn enough money in a job to be able to save up so that you have the kind of lifestyle where you fly to Europe every year. But as a business owner that's employing lots of people, then maybe you can. But the question is, how do you become a business owner? Now, sometimes that happens because people work really hard. Sometimes it happens because people get lucky or they have a particular talent. And it's not a talent that is these aren't kind of a talent that is universally useful, but a talent that fits the society that you happen to live in at the time. You could be a great basketball player or something. Well, that's great. Now it would have done you no good at all in medieval France. You'd have been a peasant like everybody else. So these, it depends what your skills are and how they match the situation you're in. But the vast majority of stuff of the means of production are owned by people that didn't get it by working for it. Because most of us go to work every day and we get paid and we have this money and we have an income and basically we spend it on living. It goes on rent and food and whatever. But we've worked for our money. And because most people have worked for their money, there's an assumption that all the money there is has been worked for. And whoever's got whatever money they've got has got it because they've worked for it. But in fact, lots of people inherited huge estates. Lots of people in England is still owned largely, the land in England is still largely owned by the same people that owned it 200 years ago. And there are numerous instances of that. And it might be, maybe I don't know your situation. I'm not having a go at you here, by the way. I'm just saying.
Oh, no, I like this. No, man. No, it's cool.
It might be that your dad worked really hard and got
yes.
where it is. But it might be that his dad worked really hard, or his dad worked really hard, or it might be that your great granddad just swindled somebody out of some money. We don't know. I don't know. And you probably don't know either, that far back. And I think there's this idea that Nozick talks about it a lot. I don't know if you know Robert Nozick, who was kind of the philosopher behind sort of the Thatcher and Reagan era.
Oh, okay.
Right-wing libertarian philosopher. And he talks about property, and he's right. He's saying that he talks about justice in property. If you want to know if the distribution of resources in a society is just, then you should be able to look at any item that is owned by somebody and say, how did they get that? Was it a just transaction by which it came into their possession? But you can't just look at that. You've got to look at the history of it, because if you steal a car and I buy it off you, it's still not really my car, is it? I haven't got that by just means. So I need to know before I can say I am the rightful owner of the car I bought from you. I need to know that you were the rightful owner of it. And you need to know that the previous guy was the rightful owner of it. And if you take most of the wealth of the world, actually there are huge bits of it that we know for sure there was some dodgy transaction in it for part of the British Empire or the American, the land rush, or we just don't know where it came from. But how did somebody end up with the stuff they've got that they've inherited through 20 generations? We just don't know. But probably there was something pretty dodgy there at some point.
Is there one value? Oh, it's okay. Hold on. Let me say. So in what you were saying, every time that you said hard work, my brain lit up, because I remember by myself, basically it was after a bad breakup. So it's usually after, usually these things happen after, it's usually after a bad breakup, but I had extra time on my hands. And at that time I was building a home, building a home, like a spec home to sell. But I also said to myself, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go get a regular job. I've never had one. I've always worked for the family business and all that. So I went to a car wash. No one knew me. If I told them, hey, yeah, I'm a home builder, they'd probably be like, why are you here? So I went there and it was just the weekends, and I just put my head down and worked hard. I worked hard, and people that have been there, what I understood was people that had been there for months. It just took me 2 weekends of Saturday and Sunday work to basically, like, there's all these levels of, like, anyway, but you want to get to where you're making tips out there at the end, drying up the cars. It didn't take me too long, like a couple weekends, that I was able to pass up all these people that are working there every day,
right?
Just because I just worked hard. And I guess the boss person said, hey, this guy, he's working hard, so he gets rewarded for working hard. So in the socialist system or all that, like, so that was kind of like, what happens to the people that just like to work hard? They also like to get rewarded, or in a way, or are they going to be incentivized to not work hard because, what's the point if we're all going to get the, I'm trying to ask a little bit like, and I did it, man. And then after I kind of got there, I remember, like, okay, well, I just somehow, it was me. You start talking to and I kind of let out that I was a builder to some people that I kind of befriended. And then they kind of cut my tips. The boss guy cut my hours. And then I kind of got it, like, oh, they don't want me there because they're like, oh, why are you here? Kind of thing, and I got it. And I just took, it didn't, but I just wanted to do a test run. Like, is it just hard work and just at least in that run, it did feel like that. It did feel like if you just work harder than the next person next to you, you can advance your position in that structure or in that system. So I don't know. I guess that's the question, kind of like, what happens to the person that wants to work hard in the new, as they transition into, like, the socialist system?
Well, I think we can see with that people do work hard in lots of things, and it's not always for financial reward. So there's in the UK, unfortunately, nurses are not very well paid, but there's lots of them working really hard all the time in the NHS. There are loads of jobs where people are not very well paid. Your car wash experience, there is a limit there, isn't it? Even when you're at the top and you're getting all the tips, you're not making as much money as the guy who just owns the car wash and doesn't go to work.
No.
His only work is collecting the money at the end of the day, isn't it? And he's still making the bulk of it. So you're still not going to make that kind of money just by hard work. There's a limit to how much hard work can get you. People, I've got a quote in the next book that's coming out. I've got a quote from an Australian heiress who's she's inherited billions, and her tip for people who aren't billionaires is just be one of the people that works hard. Well, lots of people work hard and they don't become a billionaire, and most people who work hard don't really get very well rewarded for that under capitalism. And yet the people still work hard. The incentive isn't really there for people to work hard, because lots of people who work hard don't really get much reward. I think, under socialism, it depends. If you ask 10 socialists, you'll get 15 different versions of socialism. But, for me, I think socialism does require, it requires people to work hard, but I think people are happier to work hard if they think their money is going to some kind of greater good than if it's just going in the pocket of some millionaire or shareholders or whatever. And I think, socialism does come with a requirement. There is a requirement in a socialist society that we look after the people that can't look after themselves, the old and the sick and the ill, and people that maybe are studying, children, people who are carers, who've maybe got a family member that is ill and they need to be a carer for them. So not everyone can be making money. And so therefore there's a requirement that those that can work, not only work enough to provide for themselves, but to provide these other services, as well as, we do this already to some extent. We all work, and some of our money goes off to pay for schools and libraries and roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff. So, it's not an alien idea, but the idea under socialism is that all of the money that you kind of earn but don't get would go to kind of better causes than to buying Jeff Bezos another yacht.
Yeah, or for me to go to the Champions League.
Champions League.
Fair enough. Yeah, can you hear that we're gonna getting close to the end here. Can you kind of give us a sneak peek into the new project that you got going on? Because you know, that one again, I definitely want to know how capitalism ends, because
Sure.
you know, I do find myself in that class of
Sure.
so yeah. So you know,
Okay.
so how's that going on, and you know, what do you got on that end?
Okay, so I'll do that. Can I just actually, before we go there, can I just finish what I was going to say about the Soviet Union? We've got a kind
Oh
of
yeah, yeah,
sidetrack.
yes.
So I mean, just in a couple of sentences.
Sorry.
So the scene is really so. So point one is that Marx says that if you don't have the right conditions, then the socialist revolution can't succeed, and those conditions weren't there in the Soviet Union, and that's why he correctly predicted that it would not be a successful revolution, and 75 years later it collapsed, and therefore he was proved right about that. And it's all, I've got one here, look, there you go, it's all in there, get the plug in. But that's what I'm saying there is fairly standard Marx kind of stuff. But the point, the thing that's new that I'm saying in the book is not only that, but also if you look at the course of Soviet history, even though we kind of get distracted because we look at the Soviets themselves, the Soviet regime claimed to be trying to build socialism. So we tend to look at, but we look at them on those terms. Did they build socialism or not? And we judge them as successful or otherwise on that criteria. But I think in the same as with the development of capitalism in England, nobody was trying to develop capitalism. No, people were doing the things that made sense to them at the time. And the upshot of a load of different combined things was the emergence of capitalism. And what I'm arguing is that the Soviet period and the period just before it, from the 1860s, constitute Russia's capitalist revolution. That was Russia's bourgeois revolution. So in a really kind of basic way, you had Russia was definitely a feudal society in the 1860s before the serfs were free, emancipated, and it's now definitely capitalist. So there has been a transformation from a feudal society to a capitalist society. So in a way, whatever happened there, you can say, well, that was Russia's bourgeois revolution. The question is, does that then fit in with the way Marx described the emergence of capitalism out of feudalism in England? And actually, there are loads of striking similarities. All the processes, Marx has a kind of a checklist of things that must happen before you can have capitalism. And none of those things were in place when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in 1917. But the Soviets basically put them all in place, not because they were trying to put in place the conditions that would enable capitalism to arrive, but because mainly what the Soviet Union hardly ever had the opportunity to do things it wanted to do. As soon as the revolution had finished, there was a civil war that went on for ages. By the time that finished, they were devastated by the effects of World War I and the Civil War. So they had to kind of retreat. They had to think of the new economic policy, which was a bit of a flirtation with capitalism. But then when Lenin died and Stalin took over, he got rid of that and brought in the 5-year plans. Collectivization in Russia ticks a load of Marx's boxes and is exactly the same process, it plays exactly the same role as eviction and enclosure in England. Kick the peasants off the land, get rid of their ideas if they're any right to own or possess or occupy it, consolidate the farms into the small and scattered farms into big units that are capable of modernization, create this landless workforce who don't own anything, who can go and work in factories. That was the upshot. It wasn't the intention, but that was the upshot of Stalin's collectivization program. And Russia it was quite good. This idea about different economic structures being suited to different levels of development. The Soviet system was pretty good at industrializing from almost nothing to kind of 1950s level. That kind of invest a load of money in heavy industry, get a load of manpower in there, build stuff, pig iron, steel output, that kind of thing. It was pretty good at that. What it wasn't any good at was kind of keeping up with America in terms of the consumer society in the post-war period. Russians could see what was going on in America, despite attempts to stop them from saying it. People knew what was going on, and they knew that what they'd got wasn't as good, and that caused some kind of discontent. And along with other things that the Soviet Union had suppressed, like kind of religion and nationalism and that kind of thing, there was a lot of kind of resentment building up. And the inefficiency of the system really is what and coupled with this kind of internal resentment is really what brought it down in the end. So, and then, but then as the Soviet Union was collapsing, people like Putin, Abramovich, these guys were kind of waiting in the wings, positioning themselves to take over in this kind of capitalist oligarchs. So that's my argument in the book. That's the new bit in the book is that argument that you can see the Soviet experiment really as Russia's capitalist revolution.
Okay.
Even though no one intended it to be that.
If the way that those revolutionary leaders were sending letters or asking Marx about, hey, this is going to fail, right? Because like the way that Marx explained it, what would Marx say about the China experiment? Like, because they're now super capitalist, but they weren't before. And are they doing it?
Well, I think you could have that. I think you could take a similar view to that. I'm not an expert on China, so I wouldn't want to say anything too confidently. But I think, yeah, I mean, China was not fit for capitalism when when the Chinese Revolution happened, and it kind of is now. And it's weird. It's not, it's not normal capitalism. It's not capitalism as we know it in the West. But it's kind of, because it interacts so much with the West, then it's kind of feeding off that capitalist system, and it gets the same kind of the feedback mechanism of, look, I've invented this thing and it's really popular, it'll sell well and make loads of money. That capitalist feedback mechanism does work in the Chinese system, even though the internal markets might be restricted. They're selling into the Western markets, really, aren't they? So. I think, yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that China, I don't know where it's going. I think there's a lot of different ideas about where it's going, but I think you could argue that China has kind of hit a rich seam of capitalism. Okay.
And yeah, man, and sorry for skipping over that. I know I was just trying to be kind of respectful of the time, but so yeah, man, can you, Steve, kind of give us a sneak peek into the new project that you got going on? Because the title definitely would spark interest in me for sure.
So it's called How Capitalism Ends, and it's the subtitle is History, Ideology, and Progress. So the first, and it's divided into those three sections: history, ideology, and progress. So the first section really covers quite a bit of the ground we've covered today about how historical change happens, how progress happens, how societies move from feudalism into capitalism, and what we can learn from that about how we might move on into something else, possibly socialism. And it also kind of looks at where we are now and are we seeing signs of that? And have a look at things like the coming kind of artificial intelligence. We're moving into an era of that. So we've always had automation, and capitalism is very bad at dealing with automation in terms of how workers end, the workers at end of it. So when technological developments happen under capitalism, the tendency is basically that a new machine comes in that does the work in half the time, and what that means is that half the people get made unemployed, and the other half are still overworked, but then they have to pay more tax to keep the unemployed people unemployed. Whereas
yeah, good point. You know what? I saw that as a kid. You know what? When we had to construct, I remember as a kid, I would get sent after high school when we needed laborers to the little labor market, and I would have to go pick them up, and I'd have to go yell out the window, hey, this much. And they would say, what's the work? And I would have to say, pico y pala, right? Pick and shovel, pick and shovel. Yeah. But and then once we bought a trencher, I didn't have to do that anymore, because one guy could do the work of like 5 or 6 guys in one, it was capital equipment. But I didn't think about the other end that like, hey, well, now you have to pay more in taxes to take care of all the people that are now I had not thought of it that way, but go ahead. Sorry, man. Yeah.
I mean, there's another way that could be done, isn't it? That that machine could mean that every day, because you're still making the same amount of money, you're still getting the same amount of work done. So maybe everyone only has to go to work one day instead of the 5 people digging holes with a pick and shovel every day. You get one guy driving a digger and 4 guys spending the day with their grandchildren or going fishing or going to the Champions League final or something, you know. But you can't. That is never going to happen under capitalism, because you, as the capitalist, have paid for the machine and you want to get the best return from it. Capitalism is not equipped to deal with that in a way that is kind of that works for the workers. It works very well for the capitalist. And I think with AI, what we're going to see is a huge. It's not just going to be more people put out of work by that, but it's going to be a different kind. It's going to be a much broader range of people. There's a guy that's done a study, and he's actually used AI to read all the job adverts in the papers, or online, I guess now, and all the patents that are going through the patent offices for machines that will do those jobs. And he's saying, yeah, it's university graduates are going to be the ones that are going to be they're going to be the hardest hit by the new wave of AI, because those graduate jobs, that's just where the AI, just what the AI is targeting, all the new patents that are coming out for those kind of graduate jobs. So, and that's kind of a new thing. So there's maybe people with more connections and more clout and a louder voice are going to find themselves made unemployed by this wave of technological progress, and maybe that will make a difference. And that's a question I talk about in the book. But I think, it's this situation is that we have under capitalism with technology, is that the people whose lives are kind of blighted by drudgery and toil have learned to fear the invention of any machine that will mean they have to do less drudgery and toil, because all that means is unemployment and no money coming in. We should all be looking at a machine that does, if there's a task that's really unpleasant and no one wants to do it, and somebody invents a machine to do it, we should all be happy about that. But actually, the person that's least happy about that is the guy that used to do the unpleasant task all day long, because now he's got no money. And, this is a bizarre way to carry on with things. We need we've got enough stuff. We don't need to keep having more stuff. We just need to sort ourselves out so that we work better and we work kind of more for people's benefit. And I think that and things like how much food we throw away, even though people are starving to death, and many other examples in the book about, that kind of, it looks like we're getting to the point where capitalism isn't making sense anymore. Loads of the financialization of the markets, loads of money is now made just by buying and selling things that don't exist, currencies and futures and things like that. That's not helping anybody. That's not producing more stuff. That's not working hard. There's no virtue in that behavior, but there is a massive incentive to engage in it, because that's how people who are really rich get really rich. So there's that, and there's also things like capitalists like to talk about the ability of capitalism to inspire inventions, and to develop. People will do better research if they have this promise of all this money at the end of it because they've invented something great. But when you look at people, for example, not an invention, but Crick and Watson, who discovered DNA, they got a kind of, they got a pat on the back, probably got a book deal, they might have got a promotion, but they didn't really get rich out of doing that. Massive advance for all of humanity, their discovery. And, they were kind of modestly rewarded for it. On the other hand, you've got Professor Rubik, who invents a little plastic brightly coloured cube, becomes a multi-millionaire for making this, because he's made a little toy. I'm just saying that, you can't say, hang on a minute, there are going to be some problems with incentivizing people under socialism, when we look at the incentives under capitalism, and they're completely skewed. They're not, we're not talking about replacing some kind of perfect system. We're talking about replacing something that's basically quite terrible for many, many people, and in lots of different ways. So, we don't need to have all the answers about how socialism is going to kind of perfectly incentivize people to do exactly the right amount of work. We just need to be better than the stuff we've got going on at the moment. And that's a pretty low bar in some ways. So then the next section of the book, ideology. So the point of that section is that even if we can see these limitations of capitalism and there's kind of material problems with capitalism, many people would argue that it's the only fair system, it's the only system that delivers freedom and justice for everybody. And so we, even if it's got these problems, we must keep it, because it's that, it's the system that delivers freedom. And there I argue against that quite a lot. And I don't think that the capitalist conception of freedom is a kind of a true and accurate one. And, you know, I go through a load of stuff from people like Robert Nozick and John Locke. I talk about that. I talk about the concept of the left-right spectrum in politics and why that's been a bit of a problem for us. I talk about equality, the idea that capitalism requires a certain type of equality and a certain set of freedoms and a certain set of rights. But I think what we need is more freedom and more equality and more rights and more justice. So I kind of present an argument as to why socialism might be able to provide those. And then there's a big part on private property and freedom there. And then the last part is called progress, and that's the bit where I kind of have some suggestions about how we might move forward. Things like, I talk a little bit about modern monetary theory. I don't think that's the answer to anything, but I think it's a really interesting set of observations about how the capitalist economy works. And then I talk about things like the idea of a jobs guarantee. I come out against universal basic income, but I do like the idea of targeted basic incomes. That's not the same as means tested basic incomes, but and I kind of look at things like employment, education, health, and democracy, and how we can improve all of those things and move on. How we need to move. We can't just keep reforming capitalism and trying to make it better. We actually need to move beyond capitalism into a new paradigm and a new way of thinking about property and ownership and that kind of thing. So that's the next one, and that should be out later this year.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve, for coming on Los Libertinos. I hope if I respected your time. And when the new book comes out, I'd love to have you back on if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Can you plug in where people can reach you at and where they can get your current work?
So the current one, which is this one, is that's available everywhere. I normally send people in the UK. There's a bookshop called hive.co.uk. In America, there's bookstores.org, I think it's called. But both of those support local independent booksellers. So every time you buy one, you nominate a bookshop in your town, and they get some money. So it's kind of better to buy it from there than from Amazon, but it's available, Barnes and Noble, all the usual kind of places online. People can grab me on Twitter. I think my Twitter name is Steve__Paxton. So
perfect. Thank you, Steve, and we'll talk soon, hopefully. Peace.
Cool, great, enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right.